So today, we're going to be having a discussion right now about our opinions on Justin Trudeau.
I'm sure it will be a little bit of a debate, but I think more and more, like with this part of the podcast, it's like this one's a little more up in the air. We don't exactly know who's on which side. Sometimes
I'm so excited to talk to you.
Yeah, it's also like a little nuanced, and sometimes it's not. So, yeah. Why don't we start by just describing, because I feel like a lot of people don't really understand what happened. It is a little nuanced in some ways, but I think we can just describe the simple aspects of it.
Okay, you go for it, and I'll see if there's anything I feel that I need to add.
You go for it. Okay, I'm like, I don't want to mess it up. Okay, so basically there's this company called SNC-Lavalin. Is that how you say it? And it is like a contracting company that's based in Quebec.
Making like construction.
Bridges construction and all around the world. Yes. So they do this stuff all around the world. So what has happened is they were caught doing some maybe illegal activities.
They did do
Yeah, they were like bribing the government in Libya. And so the government of Canada or some prosecution found out, so they need to be charged. The problem was that they're worried about charging them because this company does a lot of work in Canada, and so it employs something like 9,000 people.
Yeah, it's a very important thing that people say all the time. 9,000 jobs.
Yeah, it's 9,000 jobs. And on top of that, if you persecute this company in the way that they would have, they can no longer apply for Canadian jobs for a decade.
Yeah, or jobs through the Canadian government.
Through the Canadian government. They can't apply for those contracts.
And people would be like, okay, well, if they're going to go apply for jobs elsewhere, those other countries are going to be like, wait, but why can't you even make contracts in your own country? Oh, because you did these illegal things. Like, it just would essentially maybe ruin the business. But
which is a Canadian-grown, French-Canadian-grown company.
Yeah,
which plays
but
into
the jobs are all over
Yeah,
Canada.
the jobs are all over. But if the company goes bust, then I'm sure all those jobs go bust.
And I would say, just like doing a lot more research about the company, there was a lot of issues with the way that they bribed Libya, these upper officials, but they also did briberies within Quebec to build a bridge in Montreal. Like it's a company,
scummy company.
Yeah, well, it's like I don't know how often this happens in all of business. Me as someone, I know we disagree a lot on these things, but as someone who's like really critical of companies in general, I'm like, this is just a depressing thing to hear. Okay, this company's literally corrupt. Okay, cool. So it's going to get charged properly by the law to potentially lose all of its ability to make contracts in Canada, or they could just be fined.
Right. So that was perhaps what behind the scenes allegedly, the government was trying to figure out, like, is there a way that we can just fine them so we don't destroy the company, so we don't lose 9,000 jobs in Canada? And this company that's based in Quebec, which is a place that really matters for the Liberals to win votes right now, I think they were concerned that if they lose all these jobs, not only does it look bad on a whole federal level, but it could also really impact their
maybe lose their next election.
So they might lose the next election.
But also, I would say is that type of deal to actually make these companies just pay a fine is what is a lot more common in, say, the UK and America. Maybe they were like, oh, status quo in these other Western countries.
Like, we should follow that protocol.
But Canada, no, they have a different type of law that's actually a little bit more harsh.
So then the controversy comes when Justin Trudeau, who is well known for his, gender parity on his cabinet, equal men and women, and trying to put people from different backgrounds, has a minister who is an Indigenous woman who was in charge of this role.
Jody Wilson-Raybould.
Yeah, and she had decided, I don't think it's ethical. She said, like, nothing illegal is being done here, but I think that this company should be charged properly.
They're gonna,
They did something bad. And as a result, I shouldn't say as a result, but at the time, so in January, his cabinet was then shuffled and she was switched from that role in what would look like a demotion. But nobody necessarily knew this. And then recently she quit, saying it was because of this that she was being pressured really, really badly to make it so this company, she would interfere with the prosecution, and that she would make it so that they were only fined, whatever.
Yeah, she felt like she was being influenced by the government.
Yeah. And just the other day, another female cabinet minister has also resigned, saying in solidarity that they're friends and they believe they want to this is corruption, and they're like, we were brought on because we're trying to get past the swamp of politics, and here we are having to leave it now because it's just the same old status quo. So that's kind of the state of the controversy. There's still a lot of information that's being talked about that's coming out.
It is so interesting and juicy to hear.
Yeah, what do you find the most interesting?
Here we go. Okay,
so let's have some thoughts.
Let's talk about Justin Trudeau. Okay, mm-hmm. let's try and chat about this through the lens of him.
Okay.
So what I find so interesting about this whole case is that I think it's helping people really understand and make politics become something that is not so confusing, and it's kind of simple. It's like, it sounds confusing in theory, but it's like, okay, there's these companies that clearly do illegal things. They need to be charged, but these companies also employ people in Canada.
Power, yeah.
Like, what do you do? So I'm empathetic to like all sides of this.
Yeah, me too.
But one thing that I would say is that I find when she talks about the way that Jody Wilson-Raybould talks about the way that they kept sort of hassling her to, maybe change her decision, maybe get some more insight into these things. And even the way that she has said that Justin Trudeau did say, I am the MP in Quebec. Like, if we lose all these jobs or if they lose these contracts in Canada, that could influence the election. Like, that's what he insinuated. Things like that just make me be like, oh my God, okay, I'm glad that we're bringing to light that this is corruption. This does happen in government. And I think that it's really not good optics for him because he sort of ran and came into power and was really good at taking to the stage, the world stage, as this person who's going to speak for the people and like be anti-corruption.
And be very democratic. Be like, we believe in democracy and we're going to follow these rules and we're not going to like be behind the scenes like so many other governments have, trading and benefiting off of stuff, benefiting off of like the taxpayer's dollar and this sort of thing.
So one thing that just made me so frustrated in all of this, because we can talk maybe now or later about how this is like potentially going to lose him the election. And I think what's frustrating to me is that when I think about the Conservatives and I think about other, like, I'm sure this happens a lot. I get it. It's like the status
doesn't always
quo.
come out.
It doesn't always come out. And I think that's why these women are, in my opinion, awesome. They're almost acting as whistleblowers to allow the public to understand that these things happen all the time. But he hasn't spoken down the barrel of the camera to the Canadian people in a way that has sounded like authentic.
Like, be real. Yeah, he kind of ran on a platform of being real.
Yeah.
And I mean, some people have always questioned his
authenticity. You said that you were like,
yeah, but there was a point where I was like, okay, he feels more real than most politicians. I like when a politician can just talk off the cuff and not sound so scripted. And it is like, I wish right now that Justin Trudeau would sit down and put a YouTube video out or a live stream where he was just like,
okay, this
I
is what
understand
happened.
This is like, it looks bad. I'm going to talk through what happened from my perspective. I think one difficult thing is that in all these articles, in all this information, it's the Prime Minister's office. So he has a team of people. So it's not necessarily him who's the person telling them that they have to change this, right? Even he might be behind the scenes asking people to do that. But from like a Jody Wilson-Raybould's perspective, like he wasn't coming to her being like, you need to change it because he has a whole team of people who manage those things for him.
Yeah, so she was saying that she was being reached out to by a lot of different like staffers on his team. And then obviously that one meeting with him specifically to her face saying...
Like mentioning it, but not being like, oh, I'm not pressuring, but like just I want to make sure we're all on the same page and aware of what's going on.
So then he did talk to the public today, and I watched it, and he also had like Jerry Butts, lol at that name, his literal best friend from like university, who also was his like principal secretary, who came forward and tried to portray that this was a lack of sort of communication, a lack of trust,
and like misunderstanding between different sides.
Yeah, because like she obviously took that being demoted from like Attorney General to become like the Veterans Affairs Minister as like a demotion. But they really were thinking that like, oh, we actually have to mix things up because this guy had retired, and that they wanted her to become the Indigenous Affairs person because she is Indigenous. But she was saying like, I don't want to actually do this because it would be taking over the Indian Act, which is something that she's been against like her whole life, which they do admit like, oh, if we had time, that would have been a smart thing to think, like we shouldn't ask her to do this. Right. But then I'm like, why would you then still move her to Veterans Affairs? And someone did say to him apparently that, if you do this, it's going to look like a demotion and she's going to think it has to do with SNC-Lavalin. So I'm like, why did they continue with it?
Because that's the question. Like, did they actually move her around as a demotion, or is it just a coincidence?
Yeah, like, or is it like a big, like, actual misunderstanding?
Right.
But I just feel like when I'm learning all this information, it just feels like, maybe it's easier to say now that this is all blowing up in their face, but it seems like there was something else going on there, because wouldn't they have figured out that obviously she's going to take this as a demotion?
Right.
And I think the biggest issue for what's happening right now is that he has always been such a staunch feminist. That's been something that I want to talk about, which is like he made gender parity in his like cabinet, and I thought that was a really amazing thing. And here we see two women coming forward and using their voice and going against the status quo that I'm like, I don't know if this would have happened if it were not for their positions as women, as Indigenous people, to stand up for what is right. Like, and I think that he, in a sense, brought that on by bringing them into position.
Yeah, it's like obviously very ironic because he was the progressive candidate, even though like he still ran on a liberal agenda. It wasn't necessarily that he was like further left than before. He thought it was important to bring on people who were really progressive and interesting and young candidates and people from, like you said,
mix
like
it up,
women
and they did.
and people who were Indigenous. But it's like the question is like, did that bite him in the butt because he's not as progressive as them, perhaps?
Yeah, or if he like, or he just didn't have the foresight to see. But I do think like that's why we should start talking about how this sort of fits in the larger picture of politics and whether or not we actually think he is like a good or bad prime minister, for example.
Okay,
in this situation.
In the larger picture, well, there was one quote I wanted to read from Wilson Raybould that I thought was very interesting and good. She said, "I come from a long line of matriarchs. I'm a truth teller in accordance with the laws and traditions of our big house. This is who I am, and this is who I will always be." So she stands by the fact that she found it unethical. She's grown up in an environment where you're supposed to always tell the truth, and she couldn't continue on being in this
And a lot of people are saying, like, it's not illegal or we need someone to
She also said, specifically, she said nothing was illegal. Like, she has qualified that she was never asked to do something illegal, but she felt it was inappropriate.
And I think that the handling of everything that came out after she initially said, you know, I really feel like the Liberal government was kind of persuading me to do something because of SNC-Lavalin. That's when Justin Trudeau started to refer to her only by like Jody, not by her full name. And they started to eventually, some people started to say she was difficult to work with. Right. And I think that's what actually brought on Jane Philpott to step down by being like, you're treating this situation in somewhat a sexist manner. And I think those were mistakes. Those were big mistakes because if he had just been clear and if he really was like, oh, if they had everything sorted, if they knew what was going on, they would have been able to be like, okay, no, this was a misunderstanding from the get-go and maybe like been able to come out sooner and speak on what they're saying now at the time when she came out. And this has blown up. Like, I don't know if they're going to be able to recover from this.
I'm confused. I'm curious because we have friends who literally didn't know anything about it. But I'm like seeing it everywhere, and there are definitely lots of people I know.
But
who
some
are
people
like, oh my
are
gosh,
not.
And some people are like, I voted for him, and I actually can't vote for him ever again.
Yeah,
like is the sentiment right now? So I don't think anyone really knows. Is the election far enough away? Will it actually impact them?
Over.
Will it blow over, or will it be running over and over? And will more details come out that make it worse? So this is the big picture now, where
what do we do with Justin Trudeau?
Because the alternative in Andrew Scheer is like very disturbing and very scary. And when we talk on a world stage,
he's a conservative.
Yeah, he's like an extremely conservative, like anti-abortion, evangelical, like problematic human being that for me I would feel like very sick to my stomach knowing that this scandal, which I do believe is important, and I support the people who are like fighting against this scandal, but it would be really disheartening to me to think that this is the reason that someone like him would win, which would only cause how many more of these problems?
Yeah.
Not necessarily this kind of business problem, but like the issues that all these liberal people, and including the two women who have stepped down, are obviously in support of, might actually be fully reversed if a conservative government is to win.
Well, there's Jagmeet Singh. There's still the NDP.
Yeah, there's other alternatives, but there are many, many people who might feel scared, like they've never been in federal power. Should I say, is it never? I don't actually.
No, they've been in federal power, but you're saying a lot of people don't. There are a lot of people in Canada who won't vote for NDP.
The NDP's never been in federal power.
Have they not?
No.
Oh, wait, are you serious?
Yeah, they in Ontario they won. Okay. And that's when
so that's why people are nervous.
Yeah, there's a lot of people in Ontario who have had issues with like the NDP government and are scared that if they've never run a country, how are they going to know how to do it? So there's a lot of fear behind that. But are you checking?
Yeah, but keep talking.
But yeah, I think on a grand scale, when you look at Justin Trudeau as a world leader, we're in a weird time with people like Trump, with people like all over the world. We have Putin, we have Duterte, is that how you say his name? Like from the Philippines, like extremist leaders who are populist leaders. But then we have someone like Justin Trudeau who I understand some of the grievances with him, and I understand at times people are like, oh, he's just a Photoshop or a photo shoot opportunist and that kind of thing. that may or may not be true. I don't fully believe it. On the world stage, he's obviously is somebody who supports democratic values. He did bring parity to his cabinet, which has never really been done before in the country. And even if those things, if you think they're just a front to gain a popular vote, they actually did make a difference. And it's interesting, I was looking up some of his accomplishments so far, and it's Canada right now has the lowest level of unemployment in 40 years, the fastest growing wages in a decade, and the lowest debt to GDP ratio among any of the G7 nations.
And he has done a lot of things for refugees too. We sponsored a Syrian newcomer, and there were some programs that we used that I was looking up that he actually initiated that did make the settlement of Hassan a lot easier. I firsthand had to go through specific government agencies to get things, recently. And I was like, wow, okay, Justin Trudeau created these. As someone who obviously thinks Canada needs newcomers in order to survive, the East Coast literally is an aging population. People need to understand that if we want our economy to survive, we need newcomers to Canada. He did help do that, which is the right thing to do ethically, but also from an economic perspective, we need people to come to Canada. Mm-hmm. So I just think that was something I got to experience firsthand that was thankful to some of the policies that he and his administration had brought in. And I was like, that wouldn't have been the same case if there had been someone elected in the Conservative government, I'm sure. So he's done good things, I think is what you're trying to say.
Yeah, and I think that like you said, I do think in some ways, and I won't paint conservatives, especially conservatives in Canada, with a blanket brush because I think it is a much different country than America right now. But it is I worry that these things have and always do happen. And I wonder, like you said, if it was within the Conservative Party, would it maybe have just never come out because there weren't progressive candidates like we've had right now in the Liberal Party?
I genuinely think that wouldn't happen.
And that's the frustrating part, that could lose an election. And that's something that I'm sure the two women who have left now are going to have to think about if the election is lost. But that is maybe not fair to throw on them when they're but I'm standing for my own
what's
morals and ethics, and I think that I want to sleep at night.
That's the thing that for me I'm trying to figure out. I think big picture, this is a good thing. This is a good moment for democracy to have a woman come forward and face all these people and say, what I feel was unethical happened, and this is how, and this is why, and that we actually get to see the inner workings of politics. Mm-hmm. Even listening to Jerry Butts, we'll never get over that name. Even listening to Jerry Butts have to speak yesterday about how they went through the decision making of how to move people around within. It was we don't actually get to hear about this that often. Even if we do, I don't listen to it. So we're all hopefully tapped in, and I think what I worry about is that a lot of people. This is a scandal that I've been so excited to read about, maybe preparing for this podcast, but we have a lot of peers who just glaze over these headlines and maybe we'll leave this thinking, oh wow, Justin Trudeau is corrupt and all these things that I'm well, it's actually really important that you read what happened, read people's opinions, read how I think these women in many ways are standing up for what is right, and I'm so proud of them for doing that. But understand what the other options are in the next election. Obviously, Andrew Scheer is using this as a moment to be he needs to step down as prime minister and all these things, which I don't agree with.
Oh yeah, and also because people have talked about in Ontario right now, similar things have happened with our Conservative government being cronies and using it to bolster their business.
Wait, what does cronies mean?
Like a criminal who is a mobster.
I know. That's the thing.
And so, but Andrew Scheer, the Conservative federal leader, has never addressed that. But the second Justin Trudeau did, it's we care so much about institutions being right to the law, whatever. Yeah. So it's a frustrating time that it's very opportunistic. I saw the tweets from both women kind of addressing when they were leaving, and a lot of people have said if you look at the supporters who are tweeting and talking about this, so many of them are conservatives who are using this as an opportunity to be yeah, we support you, we're so happy you stood up for justice. Mm-hmm. But it's how do we and I agree, they stood up for justice
and they stood up for what is right.
How do we make sure as progressive people who want a country where we support all different
and anti-corruption
people, that we don't let this moment be taken out of context and be used as it's such a scandal. I don't know. It's just I was really sad reading about it because there's a lot at stake in a liberal democracy. Yeah. A democracy that does favor transparency. And I agree, Justin Trudeau is kind of, since he's been elected, gone a little behind the scenes, not talked as much, maybe not been as transparent as he should have been.
Exactly. That's what I think his mistake is. Yeah.
But at the risk of what? You think that the Conservative government's more transparent, that they're going to have an interest in supporting science and supporting climate change and supporting the initiatives that will cost the country money, but for the benefit of more people.
But I still don't think that you can then just like ignore the fact that this happened. Like that's why I think it's so interesting that people read about this and have a good understanding of where they want their opinion to lie, because you're right. The Conservatives are going to use this like to their advantage, and I think there is a way in which, especially with Jane Philpott stepping down, like there's a way that I don't think that they can necessarily recover from the optics of this. Two women really coming forward and saying that this was a mistake. And I think, in my opinion, though, like in the larger picture, like I'm proud that they did that and they came forward and said those things. But I do think there's a lot more at stake here. And I think what frustrates me is that, as someone who is left-leaning and who has done a lot of research, even, for example, with what's going on in America right now with Fox News and how they literally are disseminating fake information.
Propaganda.
They are feeling comfortable with using propaganda, and they've literally studied right-wing establishments like Fox News and the way they disseminate information, and left-wing, and they've found that right-wing people are a lot more comfortable with fully lying, with literally not telling the truth. And I think that is really scary, because I'm not saying yet that necessarily that's what Conservatives are going to do, but Doug Ford, the Conservative leader of Ontario, certainly is comfortable with that. So there is this level of like, okay, we can't just allow us all to go, okay, Justin Trudeau is bad, so now we have to flip the switch. We have to understand, like, in a nuanced way, where our opinions lie, and I just don't think people have the time and energy to be doing that. Like,
it's hard.
I think I really got to understand this because I know we wanted to talk about it on this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's confusing. I would just like want people to know that it is exciting to learn about these things, and it is important to educate yourself on what's going on. But you're right. This could be the thing that ruins Justin Trudeau's legacy, which I don't know if necessarily that is fair based on what happened. But I do really think that there is a world where it's like these things need to happen in order for things to change. And just because you claim to be a feminist and you use all of these optics for your advantage,
you can't exploit them without actually standing to their standard. You know what I mean? Like you can't exploit progressivism, is that a word? Without also being held to its judgment.
And really like gain the benefits of the world stage, thinking of you as the leader of like the progressive movement, then these things are going to come back and haunt you if you don't handle them properly. It's one of those frustrating things where it's like with great power comes great responsibility. And he really propped up his responsibility as that person, and we expect so much of people like this to be perfect. Right. But for me,
I think I heard an interesting quote. I don't know if it was from him. Someone was talking about him. They said like, don't compare me to, okay, this is like going to be a really botched version of this, but it's like, don't judge me by the standard of God, judge me by the standard of who I'm up against.
Yeah.
Which is like an interesting thing, because right now everyone's like, he's so bad, but then I think the end of our whole conversation here has been like, but we should really be evaluating the Liberal Party against the other parties they're running against, and not to the standard of being perfect when it comes to the election. Right now we can judge, I think, but then when it comes to the election, it's like, this doesn't stand in isolation of the comparison between what the parties actually stand for, I think.
So the last thing that I want to say is that what this continually makes me feel, is that we need women to be in power is like something I really think that needs to happen. And then think for that to happen, men need to start stepping down their responsibility. I think we need to be propping women up, which he actually did with gender parity, but we need to go even further. I think climate change is the biggest issue of our time. We all need to be focusing on that. So when the next election comes, the Conservative government is not the government to vote in. The other two parties are the ones that are better at it. But I think Justin Trudeau has made a huge mistake with the pipelines in Canada. I am, I guess, thinking of those from a more radical perspective, because I do have opinions on how we should run the energy sector of Canada, and I really think we need to be phasing that out, which he's not. He's very centrist on those things. So I just think, like, come the next election, again, vote for science, vote for climate change, wherever you are across the world. If you want your kids and your kids' kids to survive, that's what you need to be focusing on. And so that will, I think, allow people to, in the next election, be thinking about Justin Trudeau
and I also kind of want to say,
NDP
like,
over Andrew Scheer.
This is not ASAP science, so don't just vote for science, because science is not always kind to all people. And I say vote for science, but also vote for like compassion and equality and fairness amongst like society, which is something that I think leftist ideals uphold and care about. Where science to me is one of the most important things, especially with climate change. But how do we improve the quality of life for all individuals?
Which is something that he has, when like,
and does stand for, especially on the world stage when you look at the differences between countries in that sense. So No final decision yet. It's quite a ways away. Maybe we'll do an update.
But read about it. It's so juicy. It's so interesting. And it's right now it really is about
and we're in the middle of it.
He said, she said at this point. And there's not going to be a judge who's going to like bang a gavel and say, okay, this is the proper evidence. Like it really is up to the general public of Canada to decide how they feel about this. So you need to educate yourself because no one's going to be telling you what to think. Ugh, oh my gosh. It's crazy.